Hey folks, welcome back. I'm Jay, and this video is going to be looking at my Christian walk as a metalhead. Now, if you've seen any of the other ones, you've seen me do my testimony as a Christian Goth. But this one in particular, I'm kind of looking at it from my metalhead perspective. So, anywho, I'll start off my musical journey and my Christian walk with, I was saved at age 5. This was back in like 92. I'm 30. So going back in time a little bit. And when I got saved, it was kind of like the missing pieces to the puzzle. So I accepted Christ at age 5 and grew up in a Christian home. Now, my first exposure to any type of rock music was Petra back in the day. So that was it. That was my first exposure, and people can knock them, but man, they were, as a kid, they were pretty sweet. So, and I still listen to them now. So anywho, Petra. From there, my parents, I don't want to say they were big into the Christian music scene, but I was able to go to concerts and festivals. They would promote these Christian music bands. And so in 96, I went out to Creation Festival, which is in Pennsylvania, and their Skillet played. That was back in 96. It was pretty epic. And then there was also like the Newsboys and Rebecca St. James. I think the OC Supertones played back then. So it was pretty dope. It was a great experience. But anywho, so musical, that was the start of my musical journey. And from there, my older sister, one of the promoters was like 7 Ball magazine, and what was the other one back then? HM. So those were, my sister ended up getting like subscriptions to those magazines. They were advertised at the festival. So my mom and dad got my sister a subscription. So 1997. We're about to eat dinner. My sister had gotten her 7 Ball magazine, and it came with one of the CDs, the mix CDs. And so she's playing something, and she comes out. She's like, Dad, there's this band on here. They're crazy. They sound ridiculous. And so we're just like, what are you talking about? So she puts the CD in. She plays this track, and it's Reject by Living Sacrifice. And we're listening to this, and it's like, and I'm like, what? As a 10-year-old, I'm like, what on earth is this music? And so we would laugh at it at first, but we were like, man, like this is so heavy. It's so like, cause we liked rock. So I was like, you know what? This is pretty awesome. That winter, my dad got the Reborn album, and I'll never forget, we're in a parking lot of Kohl's and we're just rocking out. So we're like, man, this is ridiculous. This is awesome. And so what started off kind of like humorous, kind of like, it was just this fascination with this brutal music. And from there, I remember getting some weird album. I don't remember what album. It's like a live album or something. I don't really recall, but it was Mortification, like a mix. And I remember getting that and seeing the picture of these guys. They had like long hair and looked all ridiculous. It was awesome. So that's kind of what exposed me to it. And the next year, 1998, the same thing happens. My sister runs into the room. She's like, Dad, this is crazy music. And she puts it on, and it has like a piano intro. I'm like, what is this weird music? And it goes into it, and it was totally different than Living Sacrifice with the way it was delivered. It was way darker, way more like sinister. And I was like, what in the crap is this music? And it was the song Spell of Hell by the group Deuteronomium from Finland. Maybe I'm pronouncing that wrong. Oops. Anyway, that track was my first exposure to the genre of black metal music. I didn't even know what it was at the time. I think I like tried to look it up. I don't really remember what was going on computer-wise back then, but like I think I looked it up and could hardly find anything on it, because back then they didn't really have like Wikipedia, or at least I didn't know where it was. So anywho, that was my first exposure to that type of music. In 1999, I saw Living Sacrifice live at this festival. What the heck was it called? It was at Eastern College. It was like a Christian college west of Philadelphia, and this promoter threw this concert together. I think it ended up not doing well or something, and the guy lost money, but who cares? He cares. I don't, because I got to see Living Sacrifice, and it blew my mind seeing them deliver their music live, and I was like, man, this is awesome. So that really was what got me really into it, and then from there I got like the Hammering Process, that album, and then into the early 2000s. That's kind of when it comes to Christian music, I was into like POD, Living Sacrifice, Training for Utopia, which is pre-Demon Hunter, and then I eventually got into like Demon Hunter. But I had those bands, Mortification and Crimson Thorn and stuff. But then I would listen to mainstream bands like Korn, Cold Chamber, and Slipknot, because the heavier bands I was like, oh, I don't know what they're all about. But a couple years later, that's when I was kind of exposed to stuff like Cannibal Corpse. And this is going to sound terrible, but there was a list of like Christian to mainstream bands, and it would do like a comparison. It'd be like, hey, if you listen to Korn, listen to POD. And then where it had Living Sacrifice and like Demon Hunter, it would say, hey, listen to like Carcass and Obituary. And I'm like, who are they? I think I'm going to go listen to them. And so that's kind of how I got into like the mainstream bands. And so if you heard in my Gothic testimony, I'd said that, I was kind of ostracized for being the goth kid in school. So I left my Christian school, turned my back on my faith, and went to public school. And at the time, I had this Christian counselor, and he was a metalhead back in like, the early 90s and late 80s. So he actually like told me about bands like Malevolent Creation, Sepultura, Obituary. And so I got into those bands, and it's kind of terrible. We kind of had like this argument, and that was that. Because at the time, I was like, hey, I don't care about my walk in with Christ. So that was that. Went to public school, and roughly around that time, 2003, that's when the whole Headbangers Ball thing was starting. You had Hatebreed, Lamb of God, Shadows Fall, Killswitch Engage, and it was awesome because bands like Shadows Fall, Killswitch Engage, they had these really interesting, like somewhat biblical inspired, like end of the world type of lyrics and stuff like that. So bands like that weren't laden with profanity and like saying, God sucks and all this other cheesy crap. They were just these, had these great lyrics. So those bands I started getting into, and from there, 2003, 2004, that's when I kind of began my great research, like the search for new bands. I started really getting into zines and stuff, magazines. And I almost forgot. Sorry, I'm going to backtrack a little bit. 2002. Backtracking a little bit. My parents had taken my sister's subscription to like HM, and then I started getting them. And they would have this like little metal articles and stuff, these little one-pagers, and they just talk about like underground metal. And I remember seeing an image of Schlechtwach. This is like in 2002, like I said. And I remember seeing them. I was like, who the heck is this band? This is ridiculous. So my parents got this split. It was from Kekal. They're from Indonesia. And then Schlechtwach. And, both bands were pretty awesome. But Schlechtwach I got into more because it had that, like, interesting blend of, like, the symphonic black metal. But it also had the acoustic stuff in there. So it was really awesome and atmospheric. And that winter I got War That Plagues the Land. So that, to this day, that's one of my top Christian black metal albums, or whatever you want to call it. So anyway, going forward from that, 2003-ish, that's when I really got into like Metal Maniacs, and I was just digging into all these bands. And the main thing is I would look for bands that had lyrics that didn't like contradict my faith or whatever. And so, even though I turned my back on God, I still was like, well, I'm not about to listen to like these Satan bands, and that's cheesy to me anyway. So I would use this website called darklyrics.com, and I would just research bands. And that's what's so funny, because back then I got into these just obscure bands simply because I was looking for lyrics that didn't contradict my faith. I got into like Goth, Borknagar, Graveworm, and then some other albums that floated around, like certain Satyricon albums and, you know, whatever, Burzum and stuff. And even though some songs are like blatantly anti-Christian, I would just pick particular songs that didn't. And it's just, anyway, it was picky and choosy back then. So 2004, that's when I met my band members for my death metal / thrash metal band from 2004. We lasted till 2009. When I met those guys, we were talking about bands, and we were talking about Emperor, and I was like, oh, you know, I'd known who Emperor were, but I'm like, okay, you know, I'll pick up some music by them. And I got the Scattered Ashes best of, and then right after that I got In the Nightside Eclipse, and Emperor had a huge impact on me. That's really what got me full on into black metal. And then from there I just dug into all kinds of all the other bands and all that stuff. So to this day, certain bands I won't listen to certain albums because, you know, I can't relate to a band that's singing about Satan, like, oh, like Satan's armies are on tanks and they're gonna run over the Christians. I'm like, bro, like, this is not, you know, I'm 12 and I'm mad at Sunday school. All right, I need more than that. And that's why certain bands, you know, I think are pretty awesome out there. Stuff like The Legion from Sweden. They had all kinds of awesome, like, horror and H.P. Lovecraft like lyrics. Stuff like that's awesome. Hyperion and Karak Angren is another band that they're getting pretty well known now. And they sing about all kinds of different stuff and chthonic and stuff like that. But anyway, continuing on with my heavy metal journey. Around that time, 2004, 2005, I got into Crimson Moonlight, got the Covenant Progress, and that album, to this day, you know, that's probably, in my opinion, the top black metal album done by Christians. That album is awesome. You know, they have some great material after that, but that particular album was such a great fusion of technicality, but also atmosphere. And even though they got more technical after that, the atmosphere of that album, in my opinion, is what really made it stand out. Same thing with War That Plagues the Land with Schlechtbach. That to me is an easy number 2. You know, it's a fighter right there. Those two albums fight, but I like Covenant Progress a little bit more because it's a little darker and a little more technical. But anyway, Schlechtbach got even more technical later on. But that atmosphere of that album in particular is what really makes me enjoy it. So anyway, 2005, I went over to London and to see Schlechtbach, Extol, Admonish, and there were some other bands. And Bloodwork. And Mike from Bloodwork was the one that kind of set it up. So I got in touch with him through email, and I met up with him while in London and met a bunch of other Christian metalheads. That was a huge turning point in my faith when I was, you know, talking with these folks that were Christians, but also, you know, diehard metalheads, and just, it blew my mind, and it really made me envious of their faith. And I was like, man, what am I missing out? You know, I'm missing out. You know, I've had this for all my life, and I'm not, you know, walking the walk. So definitely a wake up call. And while there, I ended up meeting Pastor Bob Beeman, and I'll never forget during the chili, we had this chili thing where we're eating hot peppers, and it's hilarious because, like, I was like, yeah, I can eat hot food, so I ate the pepper, and the guy from Extol was like, you know, tears are going down because it's so hot. I ate it, I'm like, see, no big deal, and I just stood there, they're like, oh, whatever, American, you know, blah, blah, blah. And then in the corner, I looked at my buddy Stefan. I was like, dude, man, I need a drink. Like, this is super hot. So, but anyway, nobody caught me on that. So, but now that you're watching it, you'll probably, whoop, there you go. You can make fun of me now. So anyway, during the dinner, I talked to Pastor Bob, and before that, I had always kind of had, you know, been ostracized by like pastors and like heads of the church because of, you know, being, you know, different and being a metalhead. And I even had it back in my day then, where this one individual that was part of the church was like, how can you be blessed by Christian metal? And I played the music, and I'm like, listen, man, it's worship music. You know what I mean? It doesn't matter what genre of music. If you listen to your stereotypical Christian contemporary music, it's basically pop rock. It's a genre of music. So you think the creator of the universe, you know what I mean? You think he's the one that made us. He understands our creativity and the genre. He's not picky about the genres, all right? Like, it's a blessing to him. You know, he made us. So it's all part of his hand into it. So, and there's going to be new genres down the road, okay? There's going to be all kinds of music. In heaven, they're going to be playing everything, okay? And it's all going to be worshiping him. So, anywho, I can probably go more onto that later. But going along with the journey, I met Pastor Bob, and I'll never forget the one time while I was sitting there, he's like, hey, you know, we started talking, and he's like, yeah, I was down in Costa Rica and got to see like some of the places where they filmed Predator. I was like, Predator? I'm like, that's one of my favorite movies. He's like, yeah, me too. And I'm like, dang, like I can relate to these folks. They're part of the genre. It's not just your cookie cutter Christians that are like, you know, flowers and rainbows and, you know, listening to, you know, I don't know, Michael W. Smith or something. Not knocking him, but hey, all right. It was just these guys were metalheads, and this was, you know, what I was into. So anywho, I still struggled in my walk, and I'll never forget, like shortly after that, I talked to some of them on like certain forums and stuff, and one guy in particular, I can't remember what band they were in, but they were from this Finnish doom band. And I'll never forget, the guy was like, yeah, man, you know, some of these mainstream bands are giving us death threats. And now, mind you, at the time, I wasn't really, you know, walking in my faith. So for me, it was like, hey, you know, get a little G on them, you know. These are my new friends, my new Christian metalhead friends. You know, I'm going to look out for them the only way I knew how. And being, you know, this immature, you know, rascal, I ended up like emailing, it was one of the Finnish black metal bands, but I found their email and I was like, yo, listen, man, you're going to threaten Christians in bands because they have a different belief than you? How about I come over there and, you know, bust your head open? And the dude's like, no, man, it wasn't me, you know, we're not talking trash, we don't care. I'm like, dude, you know, and at the time he was like, why did you do that? Like, and, you know, didn't talk to me, and I was like, dang, like, you know, that's the thing. At the time, I look back and I laugh, and it's terrible. But it's just, at the time, I wasn't walking in my faith. And I was like, I'm going to do the only way I know how, like the street. And now I know better now, of course. But in particular, it kind of opened my eyes to like how things kind of go in Europe. And in Europe, you don't